Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ryan. I'm excited to be with you today. It's currently Thanksgiving night as I'm recording this, and I am thankful for Jeff Fortier who sent me a bunch of E.H. Taylor, and we're going to dive into it. I'm also thankful for a handful of new Patreon supporters, including DBS Purge and Eric Hansen, as well as Stephen Pike at that upper tier, which is huge support. Thank you so much. Welcome. But we're going to be talking E.H. Taylor. Now I'm going to get these poured, let them start to open up, but we're going to talk about the whole lineup and really ask the question, is it worth the hunt to get E.H. Taylor? And also, like, what's the difference between E.H. Taylor and Eagle Rare? It's the same mash bill from the same distillery, different price points. What's the difference? Why should you be on the lookout for E.H. Taylor? We're going to talk about all that today. Thanks again, Jeff, for sending these samples over. Really appreciate you. Last time I had a bottle of E.H. Taylor on my shelf was when I was a groomsman in my buddy's wedding, which made a really great groomsman gift. But I'm not the kind of guy to let something sit on my shelf. If I like whiskey, I drink it. So I don't tend to keep bottles around for very long. So it has long since left my shelf. And real quick, before we dive into these, I do want to address that question. What's the difference between E.H. Taylor and some of the other products coming out of Buffalo Trace? Especially if it's like using the same mash bill, is it the same whiskey? I mean, Eagle Rare, 10-year-old, same mash bill. This is literally the same distillate. So everything up until the point where it goes into the warehouse is the same as Eagle Rare. Same runs out the still, same white dog. They put it in a barrel, but the question is, where do they put it, right? So Eagle Rare, 10-year-old, goes into, there's a specific rack house that goes to, but it's different than the warehouse that they send the E.H. Taylor stuff to. So all the E.H. Taylor stuff goes to a specific warehouse, a bonded warehouse that E.H. Taylor had built. So it's a very special warehouse, and so obviously different warehouses contribute different things. How many stories are there? What's the airflow circulation like? Humidity, all of these things. Is it insulated well? Is it made out of stone, concrete, metal? All warehouses are different and can contribute different things to the flavor profile. So that really is the difference. It's technically the same distillate, same mash bill as Eagle Rare. It just goes and ages in a different location. The special sequestered off E.H. Taylor warehouse. Now, Eagle Rare is $35 a bottle, which I still think is a steal. I really like Eagle Rare. Usually, if there's a bottle of Blanton's like this, if there's a bottle of Blanton's on the shelf at $65, $70, and there's a bottle of Eagle Rare for $35, more often than not these days, I'm just gonna grab this. Because I know it's like popular to either be a hardcore collector of Blanton's, or it's popular to swing the other way and be like, it's never worth it. I mean, listen, I'm glad I've got Blanton's on my shelf, but I actually think this drink's better. Personal palate, personal preference. For $35, I like Eagle Rare more. But I want to dive into these E.H. Taylors and see if they can really hold a candle to the rest of the Buffalo Trace lineup. First and foremost, I really like the bottling of E.H. Taylor. I think that the bottling is really clean. It's got a great branding sort of vibe to it. I like that like tanned hide tan color that you get on the bottles and on the labels. I think that's really clean. First thing we're going to dive into tonight is the small batch. So the small batch is, like I said, it's in that bonded warehouse. So it is 100 proof because it's bottled in bond. Has to be aged at least 4 years. Although we know that the age on E.H. Taylor small batch is probably around 7 years. On the nose, I get almost like that amaretto and cherry, like candied almonds and cherries. Yeah, it's really sweet and even a little bit floral, almost like honeysuckles. I grew up with a big honeysuckle bush right out the front of my front door where I grew up. And I would grab those. I'd run outside to go climb trees and play and whatnot, and I'd grab a honeysuckle on my way off. I think I grew up thinking this was something every kid did, just because I had one of those bushes in the front yard. But I talk to people and they're like, I have no idea what honeysuckle is. It's like these little flowers, and you'd pop the flower off of the branch, and there was like a little green bulb at the base of the flower. And so you'd pinch that bulb and you'd pull it through, and the like stems that stick out of the middle of the flower you'd pull them through the petals, and they would pull the nectar off the sides and out of the base of the flower, and you pull it out the other end, and the tip of that those stems would then be covered in that nectar, and you just lick them and go. They were very sweet. It's like a sweet and floral kind of a note, almost like honey and lavender, you know what I mean? And sometimes when I smell different whiskeys that have a somewhat sweet and floral note, it takes me back to those honeysuckles. Anyways, I'm excited to try this. Wow. You know, like that sort of amaretto and cherry vibe I got off the nose? I don't get that on the palate at all. It really is leaning into those more floral notes. Honey and nectar, maybe a little bit of that lavender in there too. It doesn't have like those deep, dark, caramely notes that I usually associate with a well-aged bourbon. I almost wish it had at least like one deep, darker, richer flavor note in there to sort of be the foundation. I really like those floral notes that are in here, those sweet honeys, but they don't seem to have a lot of great foundations supporting them. You know what I mean? They're just kind of floating there. All in all, I think it's really tasty, and it's hard to argue with the price point at $45 for the small batch. For 45 bucks, that's not bad at all. Now we're gonna slide on over to the rye. So this isn't every single E.H. Taylor product out there. In fact, E.H. Taylor, the whole lineup, they tend to do some experimental things too. So there's actually lots of different kinds of E.H. Taylor bottles out there. These are just some of the more common ones, the more core line. You get the small batch, you get the barrel proof, you get the single barrel, and you get the rye. And that's what this one is. So it's Buffalo Trace Rye Mash Bill, but sent to that E.H. Taylor warehouse. Now the rye is going to jump up in price point all the way up to about $80. And this is also 100 proof, bottled in bond. It doesn't hit me with a lot of like initial spice or mint like you get it with a lot of young ryes. Because again, this is probably around that 7-year-old range. So it's mellowed out a little bit. A lot of times people associate rye with spicy, bold, hot, peppery flavors. And you still get some of that when it's aged longer. But those are really like hallmark flavors that you get out of a young rye. But ryes that have had a little bit more time to mellow out in that barrel, the oak gets a chance to come forward and play a little bit more. And then also these more delicate like yellow fruit notes. A lot of times you get things like peach and nectarines and stuff like that. I almost get like a honeydew melon or maybe even pear on the nose with a little of like white peppercorn. Yeah, pretty pleasant nose. It doesn't smack you. It's pretty delicate, actually. Let's go in on it. Got a little bit of that melon up front, and then that spice comes to play. That peppery peppercorn spice comes in, and that's like the tail end of the palate. But then as it tapers off into the finish, I just get a ton of honey and oak, which isn't something I normally get on the finish for a rye. Yeah, sweet fruit, then a little spice, honey and oak on the finish. That's really good. I think that's certainly a more well-established sip than the small batch is. That can stand on its own and be memorable in some capacity, you know what I mean? Yeah, certainly not big and bold. It's just a well-balanced sip, and I can appreciate that. That's a really tasty rye. Now we'll move on to the darkest of the three that we're trying today. This is the E.H. Taylor Barrel Proof. So again, it's probably the same age as the small batch stuff. Probably looking at that 7, maybe 8 years old. But it is uncut, it is unfiltered. So these are going to tend to run north of 120 proof. But knowing that it is barrel proof, I was expecting to see some really thick, juicy runs. You know what I mean? Like these big, thick drips running down the glass. And it is leaving a nice thin film, but nothing like really dramatic or pronounced. No big drops running down the sides of the glass, which surprises me given the proof point. I can definitely tell on the nose that it is the same juice as the small batch. I'm getting those floral notes in the honey and the nectar, the honeysuckle, but I'm getting a lot more of that caramel and vanilla, which I think is just the proof point on it. You know, it hasn't been watered down. So I'm kind of hoping on the nose alone that this is going to bring some of that foundation that I felt like we needed on the small batch to really support it and uplift those floral and nectar and honey notes that we were getting on that. This might be able to establish that foundation to lift those things up. Let's try it. Yes. That's the best pour of the night. Hands down. I didn't lose the floral notes and the honeysuckle. That's still in there. But they're not just floating out there on their own. They are very well supported by a little bit of peppery spice on this too, which is surprising. This is low rye in the mash. But it's got some heat to it. It's got some robustness, that vanilla and the caramel. But I'm also getting a lot of rich oak there, some tannic oak too, which is kind of helping to offset just the sweet and the lightness of the floral. It's getting offset, so you've got a couple of different flavors playing off each other, balancing each other out. And I should note this is around $75 a bottle for the barrel proof. And at $75, I think that is an exceptional pour. Yeah, so if I'm going to like rank these pours tonight, I think the barrel proof takes first place. Second place would go to the rye. Third place would be the small batch. But yeah, I think the barrel proof has a lot more going for it just because it is balanced out. It's a full sip. Well, I felt like the small batch was like a partial sip, you know what I mean? Yeah, I just keep reaching for that barrel proof and sipping more of it. So yeah, that is our E.H. Taylor lineup for the night and my impressions of them. I think that the barrel proof is certainly a buy. If you see it on a shelf, pick it up, especially at $75 a bottle. I think that is it's a pretty fair price point for that pour. And if you see the rye, I think the rye was really good. The price is a little steep at $80 for that pour, but I do think that it had some unique flavors on the finish that set it apart from what I would expect from a rye. I liked the honey and the toasted oak that we ended up on. So if that sounds like it's your jam, drop the 80 bucks on the bottle. And if you see the small batch, I mean, I can't recommend that you don't buy it. I felt like it was maybe an impartial flavor profile. It needed more, but it was certainly good. You know, and I liked where it took me, especially for a bourbon, taking me into some of those floral notes that you don't typically get. Thanks again for watching, and feel free to consider subscribing to the channel too for additional whiskey content. We've experienced a lot of growth on the channel lately, which is really cool. I really appreciate that from you guys and all the support, the viewership, and the engagement has really, I think, has really been a big factor in that growth, because anytime that you guys leave likes and comments or you subscribe directly through a video, YouTube interprets that as really positive engagement, and it tries to push our content out there in front of more people. So if you've been engaging with the content in any capacity, thank you so much. I think that you are to blame, or rather to credit, for the growth of the channel lately. Thank you so much for your support. Cheers! May you live richly and get better with age, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.